Today, we're going to have what we'll call a sitting on the front porch in our rocking chairs, talking about the fire service and the heroic events that Chief Paul Smith and myself have encountered. Yeah, I think you're going to enjoy these kind of fireside chats that we're proposing to do. And today we're going to talk about what I consider one of the most innovative um, inventions in the fire service since the invention of water. And that is the introduction to the United States of America, what we call NFPA 13D, which is the installation of sprinkler systems in 1 and 2 family and manufactured homes. As Chief Smith will come into the program in a little while and talk about his father, who was very instrumental in the conceptual development of this, I consider a world-renowned standard. And when we're done talking, you'll have an understanding of the significance of this standard, okay? We, in the United States, since 1896, we have had sprinkler systems, and we've all seen them. We're all in all our businesses. They've been around. The oldest one I ever encountered was when I was working in San Rafael, the old Macy's store across the street from the courthouse. The sprinkler system, a 2-story building, was built in 1938, and when they redid it into a gym. All the sprinkler heads had to be removed because sprinkler heads have to be either tested or removed every 50 years. And we do have now a lot of sprinkler systems that are more than 50 years old. So that's probably one of those things that's falling through the crack. But the thing about those sprinkler systems that were developed for the new business in the industrial complex that was happening in the northeast part of America with all the mills, was the idea was just to put water on the floor. That was simply it. A fusible link goes off, water is discharged and falls on the floor. And the key to this day is still the same concept. It only controls the fire, it does not extinguish the fire. The local fire department still has to respond using their handheld lines and extinguish the fire. And water is added to the sprinkler system calculations for that purpose, to extinguish the fire. So it only controls fire, and in 2020, the concept's still the same, except for some new systems that are being out well beyond what we want to talk about today. And so what happened was, over the period of time since 1896 in the industrial complex, and America was growing, people were coming in from Europe to fill the labor market, and so we were building and building. And one of the side notes was, as the world's largest industrial complex, we were also losing the most citizens in single-family homes. And by 1974, 71, 68, when they started looking at it, we were losing 14,000 Americans a year in single-family homes. And that was just astronomical in the world market. So it was the first time in our history that the federal government stepped in to address local fire protection. They couldn't continue that. We could not continue that thing. You think the virus, it's kind of like what's going on with the virus right now. So, but 14,000 a year was a tremendous amount of people dying in homes. So in 1968, President Johnson signed into law a fire prevention act, and then in 71, 72, Nixon created a commission, and that commission was made up of fire protection engineers all over the country, and their assignment was kind of like what John F. Kennedy challenged us to go to the moon and back. Their challenge was to develop some technique, unbeknown, nothing's been invented yet, on how to control these 14,000 deaths. What system can we develop to do it? So they were starting from scratch I mean, nothing. The sprinkler heads weren't designed yet. It weren't even invented yet. What we were going to do, the only thing they had to fall back on was the existing, what we called NFPA 13 sprinkler systems. And they were for just commercial, this what set the floor. So as fire protection engineers, they set this standard high. Once they set into motion, they're going to work on it. And when I get done explaining the concept of their science, it'll all make sense to you. The first thing they decided to do is they were going to develop a system that would control a fire in its incipient stage before flashover. Now, flashover, as we all know in the fire service, is when the room heats, the temperatures are in excess of, let's say, 1,000 degrees, which is almost beyond the most common ignitable material in the room. And once that temperature is reached, the room is totally engulfed in flame. It's non-survivable. Anyone in the room cannot survive that. So that was one of their first goals. We're going to develop the system to prevent flashover, giving the family the opportunity to escape. Okay, that's good, but how do you do that? And so they set the standard at the sprinkler heads in the ceiling, let's say a 10-foot ceiling. They said that the temperature at that low cannot exceed 600 degrees, well below 1,000 for flashover. Okay, that was a good goal. How they're going to make it, they don't know yet. And then they would design a floor 6 feet off the floor. The temperature can't go above 130, so the family would not get hurt in evacuating the building. So they set so high standards for themselves. And the biggest thing was the development of the sprinkler head. The materials that are going to go into this sprinkler head to be able to perform all of these things. And one of the key events that they decided to do, as I said earlier, the commercial sprinkler system only covers the floor. They decided to cover the floor, and the sprinkler head was going to throw water within 28 inches of the ceiling. The concept to be to catch any drapes or curtains near a couch that would be flashing up the wall, and beginning to really heat the room up real quick. And so that was a pretty ambitious thing. Keep in mind, the materials of these sprinkler heads hasn't even been thought of yet. So what happened was the commissioner went to work. These people went to work, and in 1974, 75, the first NFPA standard was published. And they brought the report to President Nixon, who signed into law. And then from that point on, the first edition came out in 74. And from that point on, every 3 years, the sprinkler systems standards are updated. And they are constantly being updated from, if you have last session edition, this year's edition is going to be different. And you have to be really on your toes as an inspector and plan checker. But the concept was to save lives. And so if all the books, and I have it in my library, if all the books I have in my library, it's this one, America Burning. I'm trying to get it to you. That is the results, the 177-page report of that commission that Nixon signed into law to do. And the one of all 177 pages, the one paragraph that says it all, as far as I'm concerned, is the following: support the development of a necessary technology for improving automatic extinguishing systems that would find readily acceptable by America in all kinds of dwelling units. In other words, they were saying, we're going to develop a sprinkler system that's going to save people's lives and get the family out before flashover from scratch. That was it. So when they were said and done, and the biggest thing was, I can hold this up, is the sprinkler head. The sprinkler head for a single family home is one of the most greatest piece of mechanical device, as far as I'm invented. These are getting so good. The average sprinkler head, one sprinkler head in a single family home can cover up to 400 square feet. So this baby will extinguish anywhere from 18 gallons from one head or two heads, each flowing 13 gallons. So it's a total, the worst case scenario where a single family home will have to have enough water supply and pressure to supply 26 gallons of water. And the average home tied into the domestic supply in the street, like every other home's system is there it is. So, and this one here is a drop down. When you can see it drops down. That's the new ones that are smooth to the ceiling. They don't look so to the homeowner. They look kind of just part of the ceiling. You don't even know they're there after a while. And when they're activated, a plate drops down. This drops down. Water hits it, and hits the floor 28 inches to the ceiling line. So that was the beauty of this system. And but what really came about, which took us 70-some years to develop, was plastic. Yellow plastic. The concept of this design was that a homeowner, and to this day, a homeowner can still install his own sprinkler system. So I'm trying to get it to there. So plastic pipe with glue, a bucket of cement. You can, the average, you just glue the pieces together, a joint to a joint to a joint, and the next thing you know, you have a residential sprinkler system. That was the whole concept back in '74, is to develop the system, prevent flashover, get the family out, reduce fire deaths, and that we could use materials that the average homeowner could use and do himself, and that is still effective today. By the time the sprinkler systems were, in most times into 2005, 7, there was about 150 fire departments in the state of California that had adopted through local ordinances the residential sprinkler system. They were not required by law as of yet. So, but a lot of us had adopted. Marin County was probably one of the first counties in the state that every department adopted every department had, every district, every municipal city in the adoption of the fire code, amended the fire code to include NFPA 13D. So that was a very, very significant piece of history that we have. So what has happened over time is we have cut it from 14,000 a year to 2,000. That is absolutely incredible. We're still losing 2,000, but keep in mind, California alone has got 40 million people. We have 300 million people in America. So statistically, they have done a wonderful job with this design. And so what happens is the system is designed right off your domestic supply. You get a meter in the street, the line runs up to the house, it's gonna run your washing machine and your showers and your sinks and so forth. And then at the end of that pipe, we tap into our plastic pipe. It goes up through the house and sprinkles. It's got a test valve on the outside of the house, and you have a sprinkler system. The only problem with it, as I see it from being a fire official, is no way to convince the homeowner to do an annual flow test. All they have to do is open a valve alongside the house, flow water for a couple of minutes, hear the outside bell sound that says call fire department, and shut it off, and they know everything's working. But we here, where I work right now, I'm working in the city of Hercules, and a couple of years ago, we had 2,000 new homes come in that were fully sprinkled. Now we probably have 5,000. But how do you maintain the non-inspected homes are not inspected? So it's through homeowners associations and stuff like that, as they try to get homeowners to test their 13D system. So I still think, as I said, since the invention of water, this is probably, we're in the business to save lives. When you think about what we do for a living, our job is to save lives. And when you think about the impact that 13D has had on the American family, it, without a doubt, in my opinion, is one of the most impressive interventions in our history. Where we're going next, I don't know. Where 5G is going to take us is incredible. It's scary where it's going. But 13T has done its job. And as I said earlier, Chief Paul Smith, retired from Kentfield, his father was a fire protection engineer and was very involved in the initial concept of this system. And Paul, I'll turn it over to you, please, and tell us about your dad. Okay. You're not on.
Thanks, Bill, and good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Your history of the fire sprinkler system, it's amazing. It really is. When my dad started out as a firefighter, when he was a young man, before he went to college, he was very interested in fire and life safety. So he goes to college and gets his engineering degree. And in the 1950s, about the same time you're talking about, Bill, we were a military industrial complex. There was a lot of warehousing, a lot of industrial going on all over the country. And one of my dad's first jobs was he worked for a company that contracted with the insurance folks to inspect mercantile and warehouses and all of those things that you mentioned before for fire loss. So he would work with the building owner and the production folks to make those industrial buildings as safe as possible so there wouldn't be a huge fire loss if the place went up. So that was in the 1950s. And, you know, I took your class in codes and ordinances way back in the day, and you know we've talked through the years about a number of milestones in fire prevention and fire loss. And I think some of the things that struck me and struck you is here in this country, it almost took a tragedy for us to adopt an ordinance. You know. Iroquois Theater, Triangle Shirt Factory, people can't get out of the building. And then in 1958, there was a Lady of Angels school fire in Chicago. And I remember in our class, your class, you know, we talked a little bit about that. And, you know, I mentioned it to my dad and he goes, oh yeah, that was a tragic event. It was Catholic school in Chicago, and they had about well over 1,000 students in this one school. And fire broke out, no protection, one fire escape off the top floor. And it was those days, and tragically, I think like 100 people lost their lives. And they did a story on it and a book on it. And my dad gave me the book and he says, yeah, read this, you might be interested in it. And to go full circle, that's about the time he went from the concept, and the country did too, from the concept of protecting these buildings and protecting the mercantile to getting the people out of the building. Because in those situations, it was either an exit problem because we didn't have standards and ordinances on exit passageways and exit doors and direction of swing and all that. And it came to when we kind of got those under control, or, you know, in the ordinance, exactly like you said, let's fast forward to 1975 and they started about the NFPA put together a committee to take a look at water extinguishing systems in single family dwellings. And so you're right, 1975, as you mentioned before, NFPA stood the technical committee up. And in 1980, my father became the chairman of this committee to on 13D. And he and 30, 40 other folks from all over the country met in a place called Quincy, Massachusetts, which I'm sure you're familiar with being a New Englander. And you're absolutely right. There was nothing, there was no material, there was no path, they had to figure it all out from scratch. And there was some pushback from, construction industries, professionals out there, that they had to fight this uphill battle, get it to be a commonplace thing. So, by 1980, 13D had been starting to roll forward for a few years in a few areas in the country, particularly California, were starting to adopt it. And my dad had this conversation with a fire chief down in San Clemente, California, guy that now by the name of Ron Coleman. And Ronnie at the time wanted the fire sprinkler everything. My dad had referred to him, he was sprinkler everything, anything, if it was a single family dwelling, well, San Clemente wanted the garage sprinkled and the attic sprinkled and the underground, the crawl spaces sprinkled. Well, it was a brand new concept. And the concept was get the people out of the buildings and try to keep the costs down. So if you sprinkler, like you were saying, you sprinkler the living space with those plastic pipe, relatively cheap to put together, you had a system that was saving lives. It really was. And my dad ran, who was the chairman of that committee all through the 80s. He did the 1980 edition of 13D and the 84 and the 88 edition. And he retired in 1996 from fire protection engineering. But you're right. Here's a local guy from, lived in Marin, lived in Greenbrae, and had all this technical expertise. And, he never bragged about it. He never blew his own horn about it. But think of the work and the time to push this thing through. And like you say, the NFPAs are standards. They're not ordinances unless the local agency adopts them as such. And I think we've done a great job. I really do.
I think a little. I'm going to tell a quick story that everyone knows this gentleman, Brian McLaren. Brian McLaren was a volunteer both in Kentfield and in Larkspur, but his father and two uncles were volunteers with Larkspur first for about 20 years. And his one uncle, Robert, turned out to become the fire chief in Kentfield. Mm-hmm. I just don't know when he was on board, when you were there or when you came on board. But so Brian has been with him with fire service pretty much his whole life. Mm-hmm. But Brian has experience as a former fireman and a history of fire service in his family. He had a sprinkled home. And one night, and the key that we didn't talk about, the one other safety issue that goes along with the sprinkler system is the smoke detector. Now, every home.
I meant to bring that up. Yeah, that was my dad's first push. Yeah, trying to get in the homes.
So one night, the smoke detector goes off, and Brian and his wife get up, get the kids. As they're running past the living room, you hear, psh, the first head goes off. So wherever the cause of fire, it's going to be a working structure fire. Mm-hmm. But single head, one head, within 28 inches of the ceiling, caught the drapes before they went up too high, knocked them down, put the fire out, and a family of four or whatever survived. Mm-hmm. Live in the house the next day. And so that's the one story I know about where a sprinkler system actually saved the family, and we all know this guy, Brian McLaren.
Yeah. And as a fire chief, we've been around. You and I have been around enough now to see these fire sprinkler heads in action. And the whole concept of NFPA 13 was not to put the fire out; it was to get the people out of the house. The reality is, in 90% of the cases, the fire gets knocked down. It really does get knocked down. The firemen have to come in and mop up, but they're doing a great job. And that's a funny story about McLaren. And I was fire captain in Kentfield at the time, and Mike Denning was the fire marshal in Ross Valley Fire. And they were developer came in and they wanted to put some homes out in, just on the very west side of Fairfax, out by White's Hill. And these were going to be fancy homes. It was a big ranch operation out there, horse corrals and stuff. And the owner sold it to a developer, and they were going to put these homes in there. And there was some pushback from the developer because, he didn't want to put the 13D systems in these homes. It was a new concept. It was the 70s or the early 80s and hadn't been around that long. And this was the first development he did that was going to require residential fire sprinkler systems. So Mike Denning was going to meet with the developer, and Mike called me up and he says, "Hey, would your father, would he please, could I get a hold of him, get his contact information so I can give him a call? I might need some backup on this." So my dad was at the time, had the office in Corte Madera, worked for Gage Babcock and Associates. And at the time they were in Marin. So, he spun over to meet the developer and Michael at the office in Ross Valley. And developer, has, according to Mike, he's got his chest pushed out and he's going, "Well, what do you know about this? What do you know about that?" And my dad opens the 13D book on the standard, and his name's at the very top, chairman of the committee. And the developer kind of sheepishly says, "Oh, I guess you kind of know what you're talking about." And the end of the story is had a happy ending. All those places went out there, fully sprinkled, new hydrants. There was just absolutely, after that, there was no pushback at all. It was, "Oh, okay, we'll do this."
It's not. As I said, since 1975 to 2020, you read it all the time in all our magazines. There are states and areas just constantly fighting not to allow, because the building trade are screaming, the realtors are screaming. The average sprinkler system probably costs between $3,000 and $5,000, depending on the size of the house.
Yeah.
So they're saying, you're driving the cost of homes up and taxes up and stuff like that. But most, I know California, there's a lot of states now here in the Northwest that require sprinkler systems.
Mm-hmm.
We're having that problem in Mid-America and some, and that's okay. That's their call, not ours. We have it here in California, and that's what counts. And it is a tremendous. I will say this right now, honest to goodness. Right now, the other day, I got an email from an insurance company in Massachusetts.
Mm.
We've had in town, and I know what's going on here. The cement that's holding these things are made in a foreign country, named to be, and the pipes are letting go premature, not activated by fire. The glue is letting go, and so they're suing the manufacturer, and we're supplying all our fire reports and our records of when they were installed and who installed them and stuff like that. So there is that. It gets a negative shot once in a while. But you think about a couple homes water damage versus what only 2,000 people in America, or 300 million of us, only 2,000 of us are dying from fires in single family homes. I mean, my goodness, you can't, wow. You couldn't, your dad had known that we're going to go from 14,000, and in 10 years, they cut it down to like 6.
Mm-hmm.
Down to a little over 2,000. So I mean, he would just say, "Wow, we did a hell of a good job."
They did. They really did. And NFPA published a report 3 years ago in 2017 that talked about then and now. In fire sprinkler systems, I think are 90+% effective in getting people out of the homes. And the report also stated when you put a alarm system in there, smoke detector system in there. The loss of life goes, down to 2%, something like that. It's absolutely incredible. It really is what the fire service has come since, you talked about 100 years ago, where there was some iron pipe with some old sprinkler heads screwed in there, and they're 20 foot in the ceiling in some industrial park, and now finding them in homes and manufactured homes it's incredible.
It is. But I think it's one of the best things we've ever done. And what we need to do, Paul, is you and I are sitting on the front porch here, we should be talking about the history of smoke detectors. How that came, biggest fights we ever had in Larkspur City Council was when smoke detectors first came out, battery operated.
Yeah.
Safeguard 700. But they cost $200. Smoke head cost $200. And the Lellis Exchange went nuts, told them we're going to drive the cost of a house out of them. This is back in 1960.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so your dad and those guys said, okay, if the smoke detector wakes the family up, we get them moving to the exit. If the head goes off, they're still moving to the exit. So the system works really well. And talk about developing a head that will throw water up to on the wall.
Right.
Oh, I mean, so I always evaluate in an indirect way is going to the moon and back, but we don't know how we're even going to start. We're going to save family. We're going to save 12,000 people a year.
Yeah.
We're going to do it. They did it. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And we can talk about this later, but I think some of the development of smoke detectors, like everything else, you mentioned to the moon and back, but that the detect a sensitivity of both the ionization detector and the radarized detector and infrared, that was all developed through military, I think, military
facilities and stuff, right? Yeah.
Yeah, facilities and stuff, yeah.
So anyway, I just thought here we're sitting on the front porch and dogs at my feet.
Gentlemen, we have a couple of questions. First of all, what was the first department to require sprinkler systems in new homes?
In new homes in California, guess it was a town called San Clemente, California. The fire chief was Ronnie.
How about the first in the country? Do we know that?
No, I would say Ronnie. I'm guessing Ronnie.
I would too.
I would think so. And those, like I mentioned in talking to you a few minutes ago, Bill, is, Ronnie really pushed hard, and eventually came out of San Clemente, came out of Orange County, and eventually wound up as the state fire marshal. So he was a force to be reckoned with codes and ordinances and life safety as well. Local guy.
Are sprinkler systems required in new homes in California?
Yes, when Arnold Schwarzenegger and the fire marshal was Tanya Harding, was her name. Tanya Hoover. I'm sorry, Tanya Hoover. She come out of Marinda, Araga, over here on the East Bay, was the deputy fire marshal, fire protection engineer from Oklahoma State, was deputy fire marshal, and when Arnold was governor, she became fire marshal. And between the two of them, they passed legislation, and so in January 2011, 2013 became law. All new homes from that moment on had to install. And a lot of cities, that's a whole other subject, a certain percentage of remodeling will trigger in some cities. If you do more than 50% of the value of the home, you have to put a sprinkler system. It's out there. But now, January 2011, Arnold Schwarzenegger, California was the first state to require all new homes.
Bill, you addressed this rather graphically in your first presentation, but maybe we'll stress it again. a homeowner can install their own sprinkler system, correct?
In the government, in the public utility code and fire health and safety code, it's in all over in the California code. Normally, a sprinkler system in California has to be installed by what we call a C16 licensed person,
Mhm.
who can install sprinkler systems, both commercial and residential. But the code, remember back way in 74, when they were developing this, the concept at that time after America burning was, we need to make this so the homeowner can do it also. And that's why it's plastic and why it's cement the pipes together and stuff like that. A homeowner, the only thing he has to do is buy a copy of NFPA 13D, follow all the illustrations and all the tables in there, and without any doubt, the average homeowner can install his own sprinkler system. That's allowed in California. Now, I don't know if other states allow their homeowners to do that. In California, the law does allow, but the homeowner has to live in the house. A developer can't say, I'm the homeowner and do 2,000 homes. No,
Right.
you have to live in the house for at least a year, I believe, to make it legal. So that's what you can do. So if you want to do your house, Dan, you can do your house.
I was hoping you'd do it for me, Bill. Hey, this was fun, gentlemen.
That was just our first front porch talk, whatever. Yeah,
First stab at it.
yeah. We can talk smoke detectors. We can talk wood shake shingles. Oh my goodness, that's a history. Whew.
With the smoke detectors?
Smoke detectors and wood shake shingles.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was 1991, the Oakland Hills fire. Right after that, that was a hell of a fight.
That was, and I mean, what happened? Just real quick, there was $1 billion industry. We're talking British Columbia, the Northwest, Oregon, Washington, their lumber industry, roofing industry is worth billions and billions of dollars, and all of a sudden we're saying, no, we're not accepting wood shake shingles.
Oh yeah.
Impact was incredible, and that's a whole different subject.
But I remember that right after the Oakland Hills fire, because there was a lot of pushback. I remember as a fire officer, a number of us, Bill, you were probably there. We went to town council meetings in San Anselmo, San Rafael, and I remember Marin County Civic Center as well, trying to push the supervisors to accept this. And I remember supervisor's retired now, but he took one look at us and he goes, if you thought I was going to raise my hand and vote no in front of all those blue uniforms, you didn't know me very well.
Yeah.
But I think it was all us local guys that pushed for that, because we saw the devastation.
It's just a matter of putting pressure on those people who are in charge of passing stuff.
And the timing was right. I think if you tried to do it today, maybe no, but back after the Oakland Hills, which was really our first, seems like there's an Oakland Hills once or twice a summer now, Bill.
Now it's just Oakland Hills summer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else, Mr. Webmaster?
I think this was an absolutely excellent pilot. And we now encourage our viewers to send in their thoughts, marinfirehistory@gmail.com. And hopefully we'll have more fire facts. This was really fun.
It was. I think, I can say, like Paul and I say, between the two of us, we can talk about almost any subject just as a piece of history. And I think this is that's why I wanted to pick 13D as a number one.
Great topic. You've got great family heritage there too, Paul.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, you brought that up. I didn't. I'll remember that. But I've been trying to put together some stuff for us here on Marin Fire History. But to let you know, in the last 2 months, I've got my application into the Mayflower Society Descendants, and that's back in Plymouth, getting approved now. And then 2-3 weeks ago, I got the word from the Sons of American Revolution that my application is back in Washington, D.C., being reviewed back there. So, yeah, family history. No, I just sit here in front of my computer and push buttons.
Yeah, a real quick side note on that. On my wife's side, they go all the way back to a witch in Salem who was convicted, but it wasn't executed. So, I mean, they got it all the way back. I said, well, the girls aren't interested in joining the Daughters of the Revolution. I would join it if it was me, but they don't seem to care much about it. But it goes all the way back to Salem. I said, wow.
Yeah, yeah. It's amazing. That family history back in New England is steeped in tradition and all kinds. More BS than we push out here today with Dan.
Thank you, gents. This was fun.